Hello, everybody. Got a good sound system. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm chair of the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. And I want to call the May 26th meeting to order. And our first order of business is to go around and introduce the panelists. And we have actually two new panelists tonight, and I'll let them give their bios. But we have Jack Boyle and Mike McKinney, who are taking Chris Wamser and Paul Paradise's place. So we want to welcome you folks, and we'll actually start with Steve, and then Jack and Mike, you can introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do at Yankee.
I'm Steve Skipniowski. I represent the town of Vernon, appointed by the Vernon Select Board.
Good evening, I'm Jack Boyle. As Kate said, I'm a new member. I'm taking Chris Wamser's place. I'm the decommissioning director at VY. Just a little bit about my background. I retired from Duke Energy when I came up to work at VY the end of 2012. And I'm glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Mike McKinney. I'm replacing Paul Paradise, and I've been at Vermont Yankee 25 years in various departments. Most recently, I was in emergency planning as the manager for the last 8+ years, and over the last couple of weeks I've been transitioning to my new role, which is technical coordinator decommissioning.
I'm Jim Matto, a citizen member and a resident of Westminster.
George Dash, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm sitting in for Trey Martin, who's the Deputy Secretary of ANPR.
Tim Tonkovich, citizen member from Wilder.
Bill Irwin, Vermont Department of Health, representing the Agency of Human Services.
Martin Langeveld, citizen member.
Once again, I'm Kate O'Connor, and I'm a citizen member.
Hey, I'm Chris Recchia. I'm Commissioner of the Public Service Department, and welcome to Jack and Mike. Thanks for joining us.
David Dean, citizen member, live in Westminster, and appointed by the Speaker of the House.
David Andrews, IBEW Local 300, representing the men and women of Vermont Yankee.
Chris Camp, Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission.
I'm Derek Jordan. I'm a citizen member also.
And Tony, is there anyone on the phone?
Yes, on the phone this evening we have Diane Becker, representative from New Hampshire, and Pat Moulton. And I always forget her title. Pat, if you...
I'm Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Sorry I can't be there in person, but boy, oh boy, does this sound system so much better. Thank you, David Andrews.
So will they be our contestants for the evening?
I missed that, Chris.
I said, will you be our contestants for the evening?
And Pat, we can hear you well, and we hope, Diane, you can hear us as well.
I can. It's terrific.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we want to thank David, Andrews, and Tony, who they did test runs and everything, so I'm really glad it works. We have something on the agenda that we're not going to do because I've been a delinquent. We're not going to approve any minutes tonight, but I am going to get it all together by the June meeting so we can catch up with where we're behind. And thanks to Chris Recchia, we will be having someone going forward who's actually going to be taking the minutes, which will make, I think, everybody's life a little bit easier.
I will not be doing it, just to let you know. It's not till January.
We're gonna hold you to that, Chris. Well, you can come back. So as you see tonight, we're gonna do the standard updates from Entergy in the state of Vermont. Then I'm gonna put either Entergy or Bill Irwin or someone from the state on the spot we can have a quick update on the groundwater monitoring advisory opinion, which is still floating out there. Joe Lynch is going to talk to us about the federal taxation of decommissioning trust funds, which was an issue that Martin actually brought up. And then we're going to have a presentation about the advance notice of proposed rulemaking and what the state has filed. The citizens on the panel have filed comments as well, and has Entergy. But tonight we'll hear from the state, and obviously if anybody else wants to weigh in, they can. Then we're going to have hopefully will not be a long discussion on the issue of public access, remote access to these meetings. And then we have a couple of wrap up and things I want to talk about at the end. But I guess we are ready to go. And I think, Joe, are you ready? We have Joe Lynch from Entergy.
Oh, there we go. All right, thank you, Kate. I'm going to give an overview of really activities at the site since the last time we met in March. Real quick overview of the decommissioning status at the site. One of the key focuses, as I've been mentioning for the last several meetings, is to remove the fluids from all of the systems that previously were operated that are no longer required now that we're in decommissioning. We had a goal to complete the draining of those systems by June, and we're on target to do that. So essentially we removed the fluids, and it allows us to depower some of the buildings and structures that formerly housed these pieces of equipment to cut down our energy costs, especially in the wintertime where we would have had to heat those buildings. In regards to the emergency plan, at the last meeting, we had indicated that on April 19th, we would be transitioning to what is known as our permanently defueled emergency plan and the new emergency action levels. We successfully completed that on April 19th. This allowed us to better structure our emergency plan based on the type of accidents that we can have now that we're a fuel storage only facility. So the events that we can have are really only associated with storing fuel either in the wet spent fuel or in the dry cast fuel storage facility. We still have a full emergency plan. We've presented in the past essentially what's changed, and most importantly, I think it's the emergency action levels. There are only two types of events we can have now, are an unusual event or an alert, and just as important is that the emergency planning zone has shrunk from the 10 miles previous for an operating facility to the site boundary. So those are the significant changes to the emergency plan. With that, we were also able to decommission the siren systems in and around the tri-state area. There was a total of 37 sirens that were in service when we had the full emergency plan. We went and actually talked to the towns about whether or not they wanted to keep the sirens, maintain them themselves with our guidance. And in most cases, the towns decided to have them removed. There were 24 out of the 37, and you can see from the slides the breakdown. 11 of those were in Vermont, 4 in New Hampshire, and 9 in Massachusetts, and that activity is complete at this point. In the past couple meetings, we talked a lot about water management. It's well documented that we have water coming into the plant through groundwater, through seepages in sumps that are in the lower elevations, mainly of our turbine building. We have started a campaign of trucking some of that water off-site, mainly down to facilities in South Carolina and Tennessee. To date, we've removed about 115,000 gallons of this intrusion water, essentially groundwater, that's come in contact with the buildings, so is slightly contaminated. And we've also shipped off just under 20,000 gallons of what we call processed water. This would be water that's a little bit more contaminated, would have been fluids that would have been circulated when we were operating the plant. We're in good shape right now. We have done other measures to minimize the intrusion by sealing up some of these leak paths, and we continue to have a very robust program that systematically is, one, trying to reduce, and two, trying to come up with methods to dispose of the water as economically as possible. Part of the success of this has been our interaction with the state. Since the inception of this particular water management issue at the plant, we've been having either weekly calls or face-to-face meetings with some agencies like the Agency for Natural Resources, Department of Health, Public Service Department. Today we had members from each of those agencies on site. We actually did a tour of the turbine building, showed them the progress of the work we've done to date, showed them how we're storing water. They're either in these very robust industrial bladders or they're in frac tanks, which are metal tanks located outside of the building, and this sets us up for making sure these shipments are done timely and economically. As far as NRC inspection activities are concerned, the NRC continues to do routine inspections in accordance with their decommissioning program. We did receive the first quarter 2016 inspection report short time ago. In that report, we received one violation. It's what is known as a severity level 4 violation. That's the lowest of the type of violations you can get from the NRC. This had to do with the fact that we had taken certain withdrawals from the trust having to do with spent fuel management prior to getting the exemption that allowed us to do it. So it turns out being a timing issue. There were no associated actions except that we did get the violation. And part of it was because the guidance that the NRC had at the time was unclear. They recognized, we recognized it, but clearly we were outside of the guidance that was in place when we did it. The important thing is that we've taken this information and we've shared it across our fleet and we've shared it with the industry, and I believe the NRC is also taking actions to make sure that this type of event won't be another repeat type violation in the future. We did have a recent inspection last week. Steve Hammond from NRC was on site doing a routine inspection in accordance with his inspection program. He exited at the end of the week with no potential findings or violations, and that will be memorialized in a future inspection report. As far as other issues that of significance over the last couple of months, we did transition to what is known as Safe Store 2. We had this plan right from the beginning of our overall decommissioning plan. This occurred on May 5th. With that, unfortunately, we had to separate from about 93 of our dedicated long-term employees. 80 of those employees either retired or left Entergy for other pursuits. 13 we were able to transfer to other Entergy facilities. The breakdown as far as the tri-state area, 33 of those employees resided in Vermont, 36 in New Hampshire, and 24 were in Massachusetts. So you can see the impact of these folks affect the whole tri-state area. The good news is we should be fairly steady state with our staffing through the next major activity, which is fuel transfer, which will occur between now and 2020. Earlier this month, we hosted a group of 15 individuals from the Department of Energy and actually some of their consultants. They were part of the Nuclear Fuel Storage and Transportation Planning Project. The intent of the visit was to capture information about the transportation infrastructure around Vermont Yankee. Their task is to go through step by step each of the shutdown plants and really do all of the preliminary work and understanding the best way to remove fuel from the site at some point in the future when the DOE either builds an interim or a final federal repository. So we gave them a presentation on the status of decommissioning. They gave us a presentation on the type of work that they were doing. And then we toured them around the site, primarily looking at the rail spur that we have coming into the site, which is the likely way that fuel would be removed from Vermont Yankee and transported, presumably someplace out west, to the best of our knowledge at this point. I think it was a very good and collaborative visit. This same group is hosting a public meeting in Boston on June 2nd, the evening of June 2nd, to talk about consent-based facility siting. I think you can, maybe Tony would talk a little bit more about that, and if you're interested, that's a meeting you may want to attend. I think it's from 5 to 9 on the 2nd. Another major and important milestone that we achieved this week was the approval of a long-term tax agreement with the town of Vernon. We're proud to say that we work collaboratively with the town of Vernon on a 6-year deal. That deal has a very predictable step-down tax payment for property taxes, and it also provided a valuation of the site to base future education taxes, which is imposed by the state. It's going to provide over $3 million to the town through 2022, and we're very pleased that we're able to work that out. As far as our continued community report, I think at the last meeting I reported that we had given about $9,000 worth of donations to various organizations through our employees, either donations or purchasing some of the extra equipment and commodities that we have at the site. We're happy to say that's up over $17,000, and a couple examples here up on the slides of us being able to provide some local support. And again, this has been the tri-state area. We focus a lot on Vermont, but we haven't forgotten about our friends in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and we've been trying to provide that type of funding on a regular basis. As far as state agency interactions, really the key focus for us right now is us working to get a certificate of public good through the Public Service Board for our second dry gas fuel storage pad. I reported in the last few meetings that we had completed the technical hearings successfully. The post-hearing briefs were completed in March, and we were hoping to get a ruling this month. It looks like it's going to spill into June based on the workload of the Public Service Board. That would be consistent with our schedule to start construction on the second pad this summer in preparation for starting to move fuel again next year. As far as the nuclear decommissioning trust update, I reported at the last meeting that the trust fund was at $583.2 million at the end of February. The numbers that just came in this week has the fund at $594.1 million at the end of April. The difference is, despite the fact that we have made withdrawals each month to cover the cost of decommissioning, also has to do with positive market gains. As you can see, the fund does fluctuate with the market. With the strong performance of the market, we've seen a rather significant gain on the trust fund, and obviously we hope that going into the future. The other thing that I started reporting on is the Site Restoration Trust. This is a fund that we have committed to provide 5 payments of $5 million per year. We've contributed about $15 million to date, and that fund now stands at $16.2 million, invested very similar to the trust fund in a very conservative investment and under the oversight of a trustee. As far as communication outreach, again, we continue to support the NDCAP to get information out to the public, as well as speaking engagements, tours, and our continued involvement within the community. We continue to have episodes of Safe Store Matters. We just completed season 1 with episode number 12. It was kind of a special episode because instead of having technical people provide some education on various aspects of decommissioning, we invited 2 of the employees who had worked many years at Vermont Yankee, who were departing on May 5th, to kind of get their perspective of what it was like working at Vermont Yankee and working in this community. So it was rather focused on people rather than on the technical issues, and I think it was very well received. And of course, we continue to post all of our information on our website, vydecommissioning.com. And I guess I'll hold off questions until after Tony's presentation.
We'll let Tony do his presentation, and then we will do questions.
Okay. This is going to get interesting because for the people who are online, I'm forwarding the slides to them as we speak. So I'm going to be turning my head back and forth a lot, so I make certain
if
that
it spins
the slide.
around
Yeah.
360, we'll get worried.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I would worry too. But if someone can advance the slides on the screen, I don't know, Marty, can you do that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so starting off with, we typically discuss the ongoing filings that the Public Service Department has before the NRC. We currently have 2 appeals that we are still awaiting action from the NRC commissioners, namely questions regarding use of the Decommissioning Trust Fund, and we do still have an appeal regarding the reduction of the emergency planning zone. We have had no action on either of those from the commissioners at this point. In the interim, we do continue to discuss these matters as appropriately with the NRC staff and to a degree with Entergy staff as well. Next slide, please. One thing to note, though, with the violation that Joe just discussed regarding the use of decommissioning trust funds initially for spent fuel management planning. Just to point out, part of this, the NRC recognized that the issue that arose here was because the fact that their own guidance in this area is ambiguous. There are portions of NRC Regulatory Guide 1.184 that say one thing, and then another part of it that says another thing regarding the use of DTF for spent fuel management. But in any case, we're taking, the state is taking this as a positive sign that the NRC is at least looking at the use of the Decommissioning Trust Fund very carefully. So, in that regards, we're seeing that there is action on our appeal regarding the use of the Decommissioning Trust. Next slide. And as far as the reduction of the EPZ, as has been noted, the offsite emergency planning zone was eliminated as of April 19th of this year. In the interim, representatives from the state, particularly Emergency Management and Homeland Security, are discussing with emergency planning people at the Vermont Yankee site, just really to see how we on the state side can have the state emergency response plan work with the current posture of the Vermont Yankee plan. This also includes, in one of the details that we'll still be discussing, is whether what we can do to provide the information that we used to receive via ERDS. And next slide. Regarding the Certificate of Public Good, all we can say there is what's already been mentioned. We are awaiting a Public Service Board decision at this point. So next slide. Just make certain. Yes. Okay, and for this part, I am going to turn over to Chris Recchia. And what has happened is there was some action from the Vermont legislature that is relevant here. So we have a note here of what's going on, but I'm going to ask Chris to
thanks,
discuss
Tony.
it.
Thank you. So the legislature this year, in light of the issues about emergency management and how the NRC was treating this and how Entergy was treating this, we pursued and received the ability to do bill back, not only for my agency, which has always had it, Department of Public Service, but to clarify that the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Health, Emergency Management and Homeland Security, and the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets can bill back for charges that they may incur as a result of monitoring this plant. So we will have an emergency management plan going forward for the next 4 years at least while the fuel is in the spent fuel pool. And we pretty much know what that is. And Bill Irwin, welcome to join in, but we are going to be actively monitoring and participating in this site during this period. And we will have emergency planning components associated with this. So the fact that the NRC eliminated the 10-mile EPZ and Vermont Yankee had petitioned for that is notwithstanding the fact that the state of Vermont has an obligation to you folks, and we intend to meet it. So we will meet it, and we'll be able to bill Entergy back for that. I am sure they will say they will take that from the Decommissioning Trust Fund. We will discuss that with them at a later date. So I'll stop there. Thanks. Bill, did you want to add anything for that?
I think actually it'll be useful for me to refer to that when I give an update on the groundwater monitoring.
Fine, yeah, that's fine. Yep. Thank you, Tony.
Okay. Okay, so moving on. And this is something that has already been mentioned. We continue to have weekly briefings now. This came out of the groundwater management issues that arose several months ago. We did have a face-to-face meeting this afternoon, and I felt it was very productive. So we typically do discuss groundwater management, and if there are any other issues that are of concern at the time, we discuss those as well. Next slide. And also what is on my plate, there are a number of NRC-related meetings that are typically available through webcasts that I do try to monitor. Just in the past month and a half or so, the Project AIM briefing, Project AIM 2020, is the NRC's realignment of resources program by the year 2020. And my interest there is simply to assure that the NRC retains the resources to have effective oversight of a decommissioning project. Also moving forward, Holtec International very recently had a meeting with the NRC that was webcasted that was a discussion regarding the status of their consolidated storage license submittal. Some of you may have seen this in the news, but several weeks ago, Waste Control Specialists did make an NRC license submittal that would move forward in opening a consolidated interim storage facility. Holtec International has stated their intent to do something similar. The WCS facility is in Andrews County, Texas. The Holtec facility would be just over the New Mexico border in Eddy and Lee County. So this was a pre-meeting or a pre-licensing submittal meeting that Holtec had before the NRC. Part of it was open to the public. There was a proprietary information phase of the meeting as well, which was closed to the public. Also, the NRC, in cooperation with the Nuclear Energy Institute, is re-examining, flooding analysis risk procedures. So this was something that was actually in the works prior to Fukushima, but it has continued on since then. It has been expedited somewhat, and this will be an overall analysis method to re-examine the potential of flooding on reactor sites. Much of the information that the plants are relying upon right now dates back to the time when the plants were under construction, and there's a little bit of lag there. So some of this information that's used right now dates back to the 1960s or the 1970s. This would be an update of that information and an update of the information processing. Also upcoming, there is a Fukushima's Lessons Learned webinar that I do hope to monitor as well. And next slide. And as Joe has already mentioned, the Department of Energy was on the Vermont Yankee site several weeks ago to assess the status of spent fuel storage and the transportation logistics if and when a permanent, really any national storage facility opens. Overall, as has already been discussed, the DOE representatives were very pleased to see the condition of the transportation logistics in the area, and they had no objections or no concerns regarding the siting of the dry cask storage pad relative to the rest of the facilities on site. With this, there was also an outreach to NDCAP leadership Also, Wyndham Regional Commission was in on that meeting as well, simply because WRC does handle a lot of the regional planning when it comes to things like transportation and so forth. At the moment, the DOE did release its latest version of the shutdown sites report. This is where the information that the DOE just collected will eventually go to this report. Right now, the version of the report that is available has the information that the DOE had on the Vermont Yankee site as of September 30th of last year. The information that was just collected earlier this month will appear in the next version of the report, which will come out about this time next year. But if you're curious about what that report looks like right now, the website is listed here, and you can expect to see updates on there as well at that same link. Next slide, please. Okay, and related to this, just a reminder, I am also involved with the Department of Energy's what is called the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum Ad Hoc Rail Routing and Working Group. We're doing some planning for transportation, spent fuel transportation. We've had a series of webinars that we were using to gather information from both the NRC, individual states that have had experience with performing hazardous cargo rail inspections, and also really just learning about the practices that the the rail industry uses right now. With this, we did tour the Burlington Northern Railroad's Dispatch and Routing Control Center, which you can think of this as every air traffic control center in the United States consolidated into one facility that handles pretty much most of the rail freight from the Mississippi River west to the Pacific coast. So a rather impressive facility to see, and it did answer a lot of questions on really how the rail industry manages to transport hazardous cargo and even radioactive materials, really on a day-to-day basis. And related to this, we will be having another meeting of the working group at the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum annual meeting, which is coming up the week of June 7th. I will be headed to that, and that is down in Orlando, Florida.
Hey, Tony, can I just interrupt for a second and say that I think what this implies is that DOE is very much keyed toward, and I think it's most likely that any transport of radiological waste, particularly the dry cast, will be going by rail, not by truck. I think that's right.
That's correct. That's correct. There are some sites, however, that the early phase or the initial phase of the transportation will need to be by truck simply because the rail infrastructure is too far gone. What we have here, fortunately, with the Amtrak and the New England Central Railroad line immediately adjacent to site, that you could just see that the DOE planners were just thrilled with that. And they did speak with New England Central Railroad as well, and they received some very good information. The good news is NECR has already handled freight that is in the same weight class as a loaded spent fuel cylinder or canister. So when we said, well, about 500 million pounds per car, and they said, oh yeah, we can handle that, no problem. We've handled 750 million or 750,000 pounds. So it's like, okay, well, that's good to know. And next slide, please. So just a few reminders. If you do have questions regarding what NDCAP is doing, NDCAP schedules, if you care to see any of the presentations that are made available at these meetings, they are available on the Public Service Department website. There's a particular page there devoted to the panel. And as always, if you have questions just in general, The public service department, you can contact Public Service Department through Consumer Affairs Division, or you can email the panel directly at the psd.ndcap address. And unless there's any more comments from any of the agencies represented, I think we're open for questions.
I will just add one thing, one more thing, sorry, that I will be attending the June 2nd DOE Consolidated Storage Consent-Based Siting meeting, and do intend to speak on behalf of the state of Vermont at that meeting, so.
Oh, actually, you know, I kind of jumped over that. I do apologize. I do have, on one of the slides in this package, there is information on how to access the June 2nd meeting. You can sign up to speak. The meeting will be webcast live. So if you don't want to drive to Boston and be there from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. for this meeting, you can watch it via webcast. So that's back on. Yes, there we go, back on slide 11, so the information is there. There are other meetings going on around the country, and the consent-based citing DOE site will have more information on those. There is a public comment period open, and the comment period was recently extended. The deadline was supposed to be June 15th. It's been extended to July 31.
I'll be going down on the 2nd too. Ironically, I have a meeting that morning in Montpelier, so I'll be driving down to Boston as well. But one of the interesting things in the meeting with DOE, we talked some about the NDCAP position, advisory position on engaging host communities in the NRC rulemaking. But the idea came up about, what if that same group of host communities was also involved with all the different, with multiple agencies dealing with all of these different nuclear waste disposal issues, transportation issues, and then potentially the NRC rulemaking. And they seem to really like the idea, because this is kind of, they were explaining this public outreach side of this is kind of new territory for them. And the other thing we talked about was on the consent-based citing, that there'd be benefit to having the plant host communities talking to the potential consent-based receiving communities. So that's one of the things that we'll be bringing up at the meeting in Boston too, because one of the issues that was that has come up in the past, would be good to deal with up front, is even though, I guess as a part of the consent-based processes, there's going to be a lot of local and state permitting or land use issues. The state's going to have the federal government's going to have an obligation to make sure that in those consent-based communities that they're following good process to make sure that they're hearing from everybody involved. But one of the things too would be, not only from a moral perspective is that the right thing to do, but also from the standpoint of making sure all of that is out on the table before you get too far down the path, so you don't wind up yo-yoing back the issue, because there were some decisions made at that local level that maybe weren't as inclusive as they could be. So anyway, DOE, it was just, I don't know, what was it, 15 people or so, Tony, that their posse that came?
Well, they were counting me in the 15.
14.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Yes, it was 14, and that included a representative from Massachusetts, John Giarrusso, who is the emergency director for Massachusetts, who handles hazardous material and radioactive waste, and also Diane Becker. I'm sorry, Diane could not make it, and Diane, I'm blanking on the gentleman's name. John from Massachusetts? No, I'm thinking New Hampshire now, too. New Hampshire had a representative there. Yeah.
That was Greg Kaler.
Yes.
It was
Gregory Kaler?
Greg Kaler.
Yeah.
But it was a bunch of people from the DOE labs all around the country. And they were just a very welcoming, receptive bunch. Seemed to be genuinely interested in hearing what folk had to say. It was great.
Mhm. And one of the things, I was going to wait and say this at the end, but since it's sort of going around the table here, with the consent-based citing, as Tony said, and Chris said that there is a process in place. I know we haven't spoken of it as a panel, but there may be an opportunity for either or all of us or a group of us to actually put a comment, send comments in as we have in the past, particularly about the public participation, as Chris Campney talked about, the public role in the consent-based citing. So it might be something that we can, talk about how we like as a public body, we have appreciated the opportunity to weigh in, and we would hope that other communities would be able to do the same thing. So I think what we'll do is between now and the June meeting, perhaps put something together and send it around to people and have everybody look at it. Obviously, we're not experts at this point at the idea of consent-based citing, so I don't know if we want to go down that path, but there could be a place for us just to put a comment in on how important it is to at least listen to the local and state stakeholders. Does anyone have any questions for Joe or Tony or anyone from the state? Derek.
Yeah, Tony, you mentioned Fukushima lessons learned. When is that going to happen? And where? And will it be webcast?
The date on that is it's June 1st. I don't remember the time. I'd have to pull up my calendar, look at the time. It is during the day. And the meeting itself is down at NRC headquarters, but this is open. It will be webcast, and I believe this one will be recorded as well. So send me an email. I'll get the info to you.
Two very quick questions. So that we can get the links and these slides going to be posted?
Yes, they'll be posted.
So the links to all of those meetings you mentioned were in there. I couldn't have read them from here, let alone write them down, so nice. And the other quick question for Joe, I think I should know this because you've told us before, but what's the employment number after these reductions that you just discussed? And I apologize because I know you've told us that before. I just don't remember it.
So we had predicted that with this particular phase, we'd be at about 127 employees. We're a little over that, about 134. I can't give you the precise numbers, but the majority is security. So about 134 employees left right now at the site, again, with the majority being our 24/7 security staff. So I think main staff, is a small fraction of where we operated.
Yes, Steve Skibniowski. I'd like to, with regards to Joe's presentation, thank on behalf of the Vernon Select Board and townspeople, thank the Entergy staff and Entergy itself for their collaborative efforts in the generation of this tax stabilization agreement. I know that a number of Vernon residents worked on that with people from Entergy, and as we've seen in the past, Entergy has been very collaborative in coming to an agreement, and I'd like to express our appreciation from the town of Vernon.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to echo that, the DOE visit that a few of us had the chance to participate in was actually very interesting and revealing in the amount of detail that this team is going into in terms of the planning, and perhaps something that most of us hadn't realized was going on, down to the level of actual rail cars now being designed and presumably at some point heading into a testing phase, the kinds of standards that those rail cars have to meet in terms of essentially non-derailability, even though if one of those casks fell off, it's also designed not to do anything if it falls off. And down to things like, when could the first shipments happen? What would be the rate of shipments, per year once they started? What would be the sequence? Who gets to go first? They're thinking about all of these things. How many rail cars in a train? And I'm sure they're also thinking about the security and so forth around all of that and the routing. So all of that was actually pretty impressive. The only problem, of course, is that there's no place for it to go, and there's no funding for that place, and there's no funding for the transportation. But it's also good to hear that there are those two places in Texas, New Mexico, that are being considered as possible interim storage repositories, because permanent storage we will never see in our lifetime, I'm sure. Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, kind of following on that, I was going to say, and thank you, Martin, like the only problem with this whole system is there's no place for them to go. And I was thinking, and David said this while I was thinking about it, was, yeah, the trains are going to go, they're going to go down, 95, they're going to visit Disneyland, then they're going to go over to, the Grand Canyon, do some visiting there, and then come back again eventually. It's like a circle. But no, truthfully, the consent-based siting, and I just wanted to say that, truthfully, that I had a chance in the last month to go to visit WCS in Andrews, Texas. And I want to say this with all the kindness that I can muster. I cannot think of a better place for the nuclear waste to go than there. Very dry, very deep clay, very good site. It's where our low-level radioactive waste is going. And, the state of Vermont is interested in working with WCS, as we did with the Texas Compact, to see if there's a way of heightening our priority associated with this. Truthfully, the issue is that the consortium that are dealing with that project includes Areva and Holtec are the casks that we're using. So we got to find a way to get Holtec casks approved for the WCS facility. And I suspect actually that the state of Vermont will have to take that on in consultation with Holtec, because WCS is working in a different direction at the moment. But it was an impressive site. It was everything you would want to have in a site that was not environmentally sensitive and exposed. And those people seem to want it. So I think we should give it to them. I'll stop there.
Just what I can't remember, Tony, maybe you can remember the numbers, but just for the public to know, the number of shipments was pretty impressive between the spent fuel. I forget how many, or Martin, maybe you remember, Kate, but I think wasn't it something on the order of like 10,000 train car loads going out for the eventual decommissioning, and I forget how many for the spent fuel too, but it was impressive numbers.
Yeah, it was something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, it was something like as you said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 cars with the demolition of facilities on site. The spent fuel itself. Okay, we're going to have 58 casks, if I remember correctly, total. DOE and also Federal Railroad Administration is looking at that the largest shipment via rail would be 7 cars at a time, and that's simply because they want basically they want the front of the train to be able to easily see the back of the train for security purposes. 1 cask per car, yes.
Now, can I? Oh.
And they have. What I was going to say, and they have to. One of the tricks in designing this car is it has to be able to hold all these different cask designs So it has to be very adaptable. Anyway, the whole conversation was fascinating. They said they'd be happy to come talk to.
Yeah, that's what
about
I just wanted to not make everybody feel bad. Because there were 14 of them, what they did is they met with Martin and I for the panel, but we talked to them about coming back, and they were really willing to do so. We just have to figure out a time that they can come back. And so I think it was very informative, and I know they did a lot of other things, but they will come back and talk to all of us. Does anyone else have any more questions? I just want to ask one quick question to Commissioner Recchia. You talked about the emergency plan. Do you folks have a timetable where you know what that will be and you might be able to share it with us? Or
The statute's effective July 1st, so by then we will hope to have something established and in place, and there may be some. Is emergency management here tonight? Yes. Hi, Erica. Do you want to say anything about this? Because I don't know if you guys are going to start sooner with the other towns or not.
The question was, I hope this is on, there we go. The question was in relation to when the emergency plan would be finalized. So we are currently working, we have a draft, and it will be done by the end of June and ready to be, we post all of our emergency plans online. And if you would like a presentation on what changes have been incorporated into that, we can do that at a later date.
That would be great. We'll probably ask you maybe in September or something.
That sounds great.
Oh, yeah.
And you are?
Oh. I'm Erica Borneman. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security.
So she knows what she's talking about.
Sometimes.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions for either Joe or Tony? I guess we'll either, I don't know who wants to address the groundwater monitoring opinion. And it's sort of been hanging out there, and we've been waiting to decide what to do based on what's happening. So I guess Bill.
Yeah, and Joe, I went and told him that I would start off, and if he wanted to add to it, that he'd be welcome to do so. But the state was working on some different approaches as to what we would do after the end of this current fiscal year. And the currently viable solution is the one that Commissioner Recchia described, which is that the state will use this new billback authority to get reimbursed for services that are appropriate to the decommissioning oversight. And absent knowledge of that approach that we would use for funding our services, Entergy and the state have not engaged in the specific plans. But we met today about groundwater intrusion and about other issues there at the site. And one of the things that we talked about was that we want to take some time to jointly develop protocol that will enable us to not only identify how we will conduct independent environmental surveillance as the state feels is appropriate, but any other kinds of activities that we think would improve the overall review of work there and the knowledge of the public of work that goes on there, so that people can feel confident that the environment and that public health and safety are protected from not only what Entergy says or the NRC might represent in its inspections, but also through an effort by state inspection. Joe, you want to add anything?
I think, Bill, you covered it. You know, we have made a lot of effort, I think, in working together to kind of, going forward, determine what the right collaboration is between us, you know, and the various state agencies. I recognize now apparently there is another mechanism, but, I think working collaboratively on a plan, both emergency planning, groundwater monitoring is going to be the success. It gives us predictability. It's very similar to what we did with Vernon, to work together to have something long-term. So I'm hoping that's the methodology rather than doing it independently, because that doesn't serve anybody.
So I'm assuming we do not have to take any action on either groundwater monitoring opinion? And
I would say no, and that we'll likely develop something independently, and when we do, we'll share that with the panel.
does that sound okay to everybody? Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, David.
The word independently. Are you two going to be working together, or will you be doing it independently and bringing back to us to try and mesh maybe what could be independent ideas?
So I think there's a lot to be clarified exactly about that. But I think that we use the example of what occurred during the tritium leaks discovered in 2010, whereby the health department collected information, published that information for the public to digest, explained that information, and verified that through independent activities of its own. So I think that we're looking at something similar with regard to the variety of issues at a decommissioning plant as opposed to a plant that is operating. So it could be as a result of what they're doing with the incursion of groundwater. We might publish data there. Also with regard to the sampling and analysis that they conduct and the sampling and analysis that we conduct. So that's the kind of independent verification that we think about, is to do some representative work of our own to verify, but that there would be collection of all of the information that's available and it provided to all of the public, and of course it would be available to this panel to examine as well. And it could be useful to consider what the state believes is in its own best interest, is something that we identify not in isolation at the Department of Health, but perhaps with others from the state, including not only agencies, but legislators and this panel.
What I hear is that, in fact, you're both going to be doing your own groundwater work, and that's fine. I just want to understand what the expectation is, and if the expectation is that I and other panel members are going to be asked to interpolate what is brought to us, fine. I just want to make sure that I understand what's happening going in.
Yeah, in our previous approaches that we were trying to work through in order to fund any groundwater monitoring process that was to be the end result, we were operating under a totally different framework than we are now. And that means that we, for the most part, have to start from scratch to think about what is in the state's interests, and then see how that meshes with what Entergy and Vermont Yankee staff already do, and fill in any gaps that we think are, again, in the state's interests. So we are starting from a new place, and it's going to take a little bit of time to really pull together what we think is exactly the right thing to do.
And you're paying for it through the Build Back Authority, is that correct?
That is correct.
Does anyone else have any questions? Pat or Diane, do you have anything?
Well, we lost you there for about a couple minutes, so I'm not really sure what was being said. So no comments, because
Okay.
we don't know what was said.
No comments here, but we can hear you now.
Okay, Tony
Yes.
said the Wi-Fi dropped for a second, so.
Well, it was more than a
okay.
few seconds.
Or a few minutes. Okay, does anyone else have any questions or comments on the groundwater? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the discussion on the federal taxation of decommissioning trust funds. I guess it was 2 meetings ago or so, Martin brought up the fact that the decommissioning trust funds are taxed. And we had the questions for Entergy, since they're the ones that, at this point, know way more about it than we do. So Joe's going to tell us whatever he knows on the issue.
Okay.
Joe's learned a lot since the last meeting, so.
Much more than I need to. In the case of taxes, what we've done is we've provided 2 handouts to the panel members and to the public. One is kind of a summary of a little bit of the history of how trust funds have been formed and taxed, some questions that were provided to us mainly through Martin Langeveld. And we also provided a copy of a fact sheet that one of the nuclear industries working groups, NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute, had published on nuclear decommissioning trust funds. So you can have that as a little background information. But really, since 1990, the NRC has required all licensees who have operating nuclear power stations to have a fund that was going to be in place in the event that decision is made to decommission that particular plant. In essence, those funds are treated almost like corporate funds, unless you're a public utility, in which case they are tax exempt. So there are certain entities that are public utilities that have nuclear decommissioning trust funds that are not subject to any tax. But since we are a private utility, we are subject to the tax. Until 1992, these trust funds were taxed at the corporate rate. Back then, that was 35%. Today, it's actually 39%. So if we were to follow those same rules, this fund would have been taxed for any gains at 39%. But fortunately, in 1992, the Energy Policy Act, Congress enacted certain rules associated with these trust funds and set the income tax for gains on the fund at 20%. And that's indeed what we pay right now. So we have all of our assets into an account that meets the special criteria so that we're only subject to this 20% tax. And that's where we stand today. We pay these taxes quarterly based on estimates, and then they're trued up at the end of the year based on realized gains or losses associated with that year. So we have to pay on a quarterly basis, and then we true up on an annual basis. A couple of the questions that were posed to us at some prior meetings and some email traffic. How is the 20% tax on the decommissioning trust fund calculated? It's really just 20% times the taxable income. So the fund is made up of a number of different investments, and that is set by the trustee. So certain ones are subject to the tax and certain ones aren't. And we optimize that portfolio to follow that, but any realized gains are subject to this 20% federal tax. And then the next question is, any of the tax deferral on some basis until the end of the trust or some other defined point? And the answer is no. There is no deferral available. Taxes owed on the fund for that income year realized, so you have to pay it for the year.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm gonna, because it's just a really clear question that will straighten this out, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but do you pay the tax on the withdrawal as you make it? That, in other words, income, you're taking that income because you're using it, or do you pay the tax on the whole fund? Because it feels to me like it should work more like a 401k, like if you take it out, then you pay the tax on it.
I'm not sure I know exactly the answer to that question. I know that we pay taxes on the gains to the fund. So not necessarily the withdrawals, but the gains. Yeah.
At what is the time at which you pay that is, I guess, a question that we'll have to have Al state.
Right. So the way it was described to me is that if we gained $8 million in a certain quarter, we would pay a tax in that quarter as if we were going to, gain $8 million per quarter. But
Yeah.
obviously things change.
Truthfully, it doesn't make sense to me because the fund can go up or down depending on the interest, right? You can't base it on a quarter. So it feels like it should be, if I were a tax lawyer and an IRS agent, neither of which I am, I would say the fair thing to do is when you withdraw the money, you pay the interest and you pay the tax on that principal that you withdraw and the accumulated assets that you withdraw. But I'm not getting a sense that we know that answer right now.
Right. I'll take that as a follow-up question. We were trying to arrange to have one of our tax experts on the call. Yeah, unfortunately, due to another obligation, we couldn't get him hooked up tonight. But what I did commit to Kate and others is that we would take these questions, put them kind of in a parking lot, and provide an answer via email to the entire panel. Next question, is the fund managed in a way to reduce taxes, for example, investing in tax-free bonds? As I explained, we do manage it in such a way to maximize the after-tax returns and thus minimize the overall taxes that we have to pay. So again, the portfolio is balanced. One of the things I was trying to find out is for each of the different funds, and we invest in multiple different funds, how that's all broken down. I couldn't get that breakdown in time, but we do put that out, I think, either annually or every other year. We put out a very detailed report of how it's broken down, and I can get that for a future meeting. The fourth question, how much federal income tax has been paid by the trust annually in recent years? And for the 10-year period, 2005 to 2014, we paid a total of $34 million in federal income tax. So we're able to get that over time. And then finally, is there a state income tax imposed on the fund? And the answer to that is no.
Well, that's one good thing. So I think actually the fourth question kind of answers Chris's question, because if in 2005 to 2014 you paid $14 million in taxes, there were no withdrawals being taken.
I was going to say that kind of answers the question.
At that time. So it's clearly
tax along the way.
Right. So it's clearly, if the fund earns interest on say a bond investment, that is income, or if it realizes a capital gains, which means, it bought some stock for $1 million and it sold it for $2 million, that it could have gained that over a 5-year period. But in the year where it sells that stock and realizes $1 million gain, there's $1 million of income that it pays 20% on.
So it just seems weird because let's take 2005 to 2014. There's this weird thing like a recession that happened in 2008.
Sure.
And we dropped a couple of $100 million in that process. Did they pay tax in 2005, 6, 7 on that money that they didn't just lost? And I don't get it.
Well,
again, I'm not a tax consultant.
All right. So if you have, if they had let's say $1 million worth of Apple stock, and that rises to $1.5 million, and then you have a recession and it drops to $1.2 million, and eventually, and they keep holding on to it, it doesn't matter that it goes down. You don't get any credit for that. When you finally sell it is when you get a capital gain. Or you could have a capital loss. If you sold some stock at a loss, which hopefully they don't do too much, that would offset capital gains on other sales. Okay? That's the way that kind of thing would work. But I had a couple of other questions, Joe, which maybe they fell off the email, but one question was, has Entergy made any projection on how the fund would grow if it were not taxed? And so, if, in other words, if this 20% tax weren't being charged, how much sooner would decommissioning be able to take place? And if I'm looking at $34 million in 10 years, then over the 60 years that we have ahead of us in this process, with more or less the same amount of money in the fund, you're looking at $180 million worth of taxes on a $1 million plus decommissioning. a pretty good fraction of the total cost that Uncle Sam is raking off the top here. So is that something that you've looked at? I mean, is that possible to project?
I'm not aware that we've made any projections based on, a non-taxable fund, because that's not really the case. So again, I can take that as a follow-up question, certainly, and see if we've, done some sensitivity calculations to see what it would have been if it wasn't subject to a federal tax.
And, I'm also interested, it's interesting that actually most of these funds are not taxed if they're in public utilities, right?
This is not a public utility. This is not a public utility.
Right, this is not a public utility, but if it were a public utility, the fund would not be taxed. So all the plants that are owned by public utilities have funds that are growing merrily without being subject to a 20% tax.
Another failure of the merchant.
And then, really the whole idea, most of these plants have been more promptly decommissioned, and so the whole idea of safe store is relatively, for single plants, is relatively new. So it seems to me that what we're looking at here is kind of a brand new problem of having this big weight holding back the growth of the fund in the form of taxation. So I'm also wondering whether the industry has done anything to try and get some relief for this taxes for the merchant plants, so that decommissioning can happen in a more prompt manner.
Again, I'll take that question as an action. I know that Entergy has always been very proactive as working with the industry to remedy things such as this. I don't know specifically what actions we've taken, but I can certainly look into, it certainly seems that back in 1992 there was a recognition that these funds were special, so I would have to follow up on that.
Yeah. Well, and so finally, I would just like to say that maybe this is something that the panel could think about being advisory about and issuing an opinion. We do have a pretty good delegation in Congress, and maybe we could get a little action going here to get some relief, not for the benefit of Entergy, but for the benefit of Vermont, to have a faster decommissioning here.
Well, Martin, I agree with your concept that this is now in the benefit of Vermont, but really, 1992, this tax was established. These people bought the plant in 2002 as a private entity and knew that to be the case, factored that into all their financials. That was part of the deal. And now we're going to relieve them of that tax burden because they happen to be a private entity, and we want to get this done sooner. I absolutely want to get this done sooner, believe me, I do. But changing the rules after the fact, but not only just after the fact, but after it was understood that that was part of the business decision that Entergy was making. Questions, if that is a problem, then I question Entergy's ability to make these business decisions, and maybe we should actually just not do this anymore in terms of privatization of these plants.
Well, that's certainly a consideration, but I would just point out that this fund doesn't really belong to Entergy. It belongs to the ratepayers who, so this is a tax on the money of the ratepayers who paid into it for many years, and who actually our grandchildren stand to gain a little refund of some sort at the end of the day if there's a few cents left. So, I think this is something that is more important to the state of Vermont, really, than it is to Entergy.
I was going to say, Bill. It's hot. My brain is.
So I just thought it'd be really interesting. You have the figures here for the 10-year period, 2005, 2014. The trust paid $34 million. If you could create a table that said this was the fund value at the beginning and the end of the year, and then this was how much tax was paid, that could be a useful table to look at. as the fund decreases over the course of time, you could actually see what the tax might be. And it might be a way, based on facts of the past, to make some estimates of what the future could be like. But you've got those facts. If you could put those on the table, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's public access. I'm talking out of just not having the knowledge of what we pay in taxes every year, but certainly if it's public information, I could look into creating something for the purpose of understanding, where the 34 million came from.
I agree it would be a good thing to look at. And I agree with Chris that I'm sure Entergy calculated that very specifically. But we need to, if we're going to take that up, and maybe we should, the state of Vermont, through the Public Service Board, decided to set it up this way. I don't know if the Department of Public Service at the time did the analysis and brought it before the board in an evidentiary process. The board issued a decision that allowed the Decommissioning Trust Fund to not have any more contributions made to it. And we would be advocating for federal relief of a mistake that we should have been aware of when we made it. Now, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't take it up and discuss it, but I think we should have our eyes open here, because it's not the best decision the Public Service Board has ever made, and that's what we need to deal with if we're going to address it.
But, you might also consider that in 1992, the assumption would have been that the plant would, operate for another 20 years and then have a 40-year renewal. So this was a 60-year problem at the time, and perhaps the assumption was that the fund would grow for 60 years, and then there would be prompt decommissioning, because there's plenty of time for it to grow to where it has to be. Also, the estimated cost of decommissioning was much lower at that time. It really has escalated beyond the rate of inflation since that time.
And yes, and basically what we have is a huge collection of assumptions. How long it was going to run, what was going to happen with the fund, how it magically would grow without any contributions, there would never be a recession, and on and on. I just think we need to, if we're going to advocate for it, put it this way, we should be our own worst interrogator before we put it forward. It might be a great idea, but it might also be a nasty surprise.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions about that? Just so you all know, I did give a heads up to the staff of the congressional delegation that this was an issue we would talk about, not that we were going to talk to them about it, just so, because I give them the agendas for every meeting, so they know that they could hear from us someday, depending on what we want. So does anybody else have any questions for Joe? Okay, I think what we'll do now is move on. Or I want to make sure, Pat and Diane, can you still hear us?
Yes, hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, good. I guess we'll move on now to the advance notice of proposed rulemaking presentation by the state. And we have, I don't know who's going first, but Tony is going to be making presentation, Bill Irwin, Erica Borneman, who we've already heard from, and we have Jen Duggan from the Agency of Natural Resources, their general counsel. So I don't know who's going first, or?
The way we have this set up, I'm going first, and I'm not sure who's going after me.
And
so we'll figure it out from the slides.
Yeah, I just want to put a little context. This is the filing for the rulemaking, and this is what the comments that the state of Vermont filed, and maybe Jen's going to be the one that talks about the other states that we filed with, but this is what we're talking about.
Okay, so to just get started. First of all, we do have some handouts, so hopefully that's enough. And if not, we'll pass a few more down, and then the rest will be...
Some to the audience.
Yeah, the rest will be available to the audience. Marty. Okay, so as we begin, I've been asked to speak just a little bit about the overall rulemaking process. The NRC's rulemaking process, it's a little hard to take out of context. So my part of this presentation really became how the rulemaking process will work in this particular case for decommissioning. So overall, there are 6 steps. First of all, a rulemaking directive must be issued, and this is something that comes from the commissioners. We then go into a comment period where the NRC staff will ask questions of the public and stakeholders, and that's called the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And so that's really the phase that we're discussing right now. Subsequent to that, there will also be regulatory bases published by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, followed by a final round of regulatory bases. Basically, the draft positions will be made available for public comment and stakeholder comment. Finally, those bases will be issued, and those will become a blueprint for actually coming up for regulatory guidance and rules. And finally, the final rules and the guidance are issued. I'll talk about these steps a little more in detail individually, but one thing to note is that each of these steps, as they execute, there is a notification published within the Federal Register. So for those of you, and I'm surprised the number of people who actually track what goes on in the Federal Register, but anytime something related to this rulemaking begins, there is a notice there. So really the directive comes from the NRC commissioners recognizing a need for either a modification to existing rules or the creation of own rules, I should say new rules. So this can come from either a request from NRC staff or an appeal to the commission itself, either through a petition for rulemaking. But long and short of it, there are a number of ways for this to occur. In the case of decommissioning, what happened here was that there was a directive from the NRC commissioners to the staff. This was the result of several plant closures and announced plant closures roughly in the 2013 timeframe. And what the NRC was suddenly facing was that NRC staff would suddenly be evaluating, for multiple plants, a fairly large number of license amendments and regulation exemption requests that any plant going through decommissioning would need to consider. So many of these concerns were expressed. The commissioners held a briefing in July 2014. Commissioner Recchia was one of the witnesses at that, just to say, well, okay, this is what we need regarding decommissioning rules. One thing to note, one of the reasons why we're kind of in this situation, back in the late 1990s, there were a number of plants that went through decommissioning. And it was a very organic process. In other words, that they kind of learned as they went along. Well, there were some lessons learned that came out of that. And those lessons learned did get consolidated into a proposed rulemaking that was actually about the late 2000, early 2001 timeframe, and the NRC commissioners were supposed to rule on whether this guidance would become rules, and then 9/11 happened. So with that, suddenly the NRC had a lot of safety and security concerns that they needed to address. And the idea of decommissioning rulemaking went to the back burner for roughly 10 to 12 years. And so the decommissioning rulemaking was on the schedule of NRC commitments for a little over a decade, but it was always deemed an intermediate level priority, and the NRC really only had the resources and the budget to handle their high priority items. So it just never got acted upon. And then all of a sudden, 2013, plants started announcing, okay, we're shutting down. So late 2014, the NRC commissioners directed NRC staff to proceed with the rulemaking to revise the regulation of power reactors during their decommissioning. And what came out was a staff requirements memo which contained this directive. And it had some particular requirements on it. And the major requirement on it was that with this directive, the NRC staff was to have rules and regulations ready for the Commission's review in early 2019. So the rules and regs will be ready, assuming everything goes to schedule, in early 2019. At that point, the commissioners will make a review. They may ask questions. They'll probably have some briefings on this. They will probably consult with some stakeholders, and they'll make a decision on whether these rules or regs should go into effect or whether some more work is needed. And just some details on the directives. You can see that there were some specific questions regarding emergency preparedness, whether or not an emergency planning zone was still necessary was one. There were also questions regarding whether the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report should be approved. There were questions on whether the current 3 decommissioning options remained appropriate or should they be modified. There are also questions on the time frame for these decommissioning options. These are things that we have discussed here with the panel already, and you can see that some of this is falling directly out of what the commissioners themselves said. Hey, this is important to consider. There are also questions of whether what were the appropriate roles for state government, local government, non-government stakeholders in this entire process. And lastly, the commissioners indicated that the NRC staff should consider any other items that through their own research or from feedback from other stakeholders, whether those should be added to this effort as well. So with that, the NRC staff elected to add several more topics in the ANPR. So there were physical and cybersecurity considerations. Also the Fitness for Duty program, which is basically evaluations to ascertain that the people working at plants really are of sound mind at the time. The applicability of the backfit rule, which I know the Attorney General's office had quite a bit of comment on that. Also things, appropriate uses of the decommissioning trust fund, the training requirements for certified fuel handlers and staff at a decommissioning plant. And there were several additional pretty much miscellaneous questions. The appropriate use of the control room during decommissioning, selecting the appropriate staff levels, the use of cost-benefit analysis for decommissioning changes. There is a question there of whether ERDS, the Emergency Response Data System, should be retained. So one or two other topics as well.
Before you leave that slide, what does backfit mean?
The best way, a short way of describing backfit is whether a plant that has a license now is subject to a new rule, or basically can it continue to work under the existing rules and pretty much ignore the new regulation.
Tony, do you like grandfathering?
Pretty much, yes.
That's maybe another term we might be familiar with, is when you grandfather a facility from a new regulation, because they were operating under a different regulatory framework, they don't have to comply with the new rules when they go into effect.
I also know how I feel about that in terms of the nuclear plant, but that's not what's under discussion.
Okay, so the ANPR period, in other words, this questionnaire was issued by the NRC staff. It was published in Federal Register. Public comment period began in November 17th. It continued through March 18th, and it really covered all of the topics that I just kind of hashed through. No surprise, there were 80+ questions. Many of the questions had multiple parts. And state staff, myself, people from the Attorney General's office, people from ANR, Emergency Management, Homeland Security, Department of Health, we endeavored to have some comment on every part of every question. There was also a public meeting on this in December 2015. The public meeting really outlined what the scope of the questions were more than anything else. It was not really an opportunity for the public to make comments on or responses to the questions themselves, but really an opportunity for the public to ask questions on what did the questions mean. And also related to this, there was a commission briefing. In other words, the commissioners themselves heard some preliminary comments from a number of stakeholders, including Kate O'Connor was invited down to speak at that. And that was on March 15th. So now the phase that all of this is in right now is the NRC right now is examining the comments that they received. I believe there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 different comment sets. All of these are online at regulation.gov, I believe is the website. But in any case, these comments will be reviewed. The NRC staff's own opinions will be considered as well. And with this, draft regulatory bases will be developed. Now, what these do, the regulatory bases establish the topics that will be incorporated into revised decommissioning rules and regulations. So this is basically all the pieces that, a selection of the pieces that will be considered for first the regulations and then also the guidance really on how to comply with the regulations. The NRC right now anticipates that they will publish the draft bases for public comment late this year. My guess would be probably mid-November again. And with this, as I've said, they will consider the ANPR comments. They will include some justification on why some topics, some comments were selected and others were not. Now, this is not going to be that they'll provide a response back on every comment. What they will do is they'll look at the comment sets as a whole, and where there were duplicate comments, they will consolidate a response better for certain classes of comments, and they will go from there. But they will make an attempt to address as many of the comments as they can. And once that, with that, there will be an open comment period. There will be some type of public meeting. I'm not entirely certain what form that will take. I know some stakeholders had requested that there be several public meetings held around the country. My guess would be that this would be more of the NRC typical public meeting, something held at headquarters that is then webcasted live, and there is an opportunity for remote access connection. Also, too, with this, there will likely be, as the as this process proceeds, that there will be a briefing to the commissioners themselves on this step. And once they receive comments on the draft bases, they will use those to develop a final regulatory basis. So this step looks remarkably like the step that develops the draft bases. It's basically just a refinement of the original draft. So again, there will be some justification on why certain items were included, why others were not included. There will be another open comment period, and the periods are always noticed in Federal Register, and there will again be some type of public meeting. More than likely, the commissioners will also be briefed on this, as most likely as this step comes to its conclusion. And from there, we get to the proposed rules and the draft regulatory guidance. So now we have this framework, this blueprint, and from that, now we get to the nitty-gritty of what will be the regulations, what will be the criteria, that those regulations support, and with that, there will also be guidance on what a licensee needs to consider in attempting to meet those regulatory requirements. At this point, the draft regulatory guidance, the draft regs, will be published sometime in 2018. My guess would be the second half of 2018, but the impression I'm getting from NRC staff is if they can get this out in mid-year or say April or May of 2018, that they will be very happy to do that. Once again, there will be a comment period open to any stakeholder. There will be at least one public meeting, and once again, there will be briefings to the commissioners themselves. And then finally we get to 2019, and by then, guidance will be close to its final form, and the guidance and the proposed rules will then be sent to the commissioners for their evaluation, their questions, their approval or rejection. What is interesting about this step is once we get to the final rules and regulatory guidance phase, now this is strictly to the commissioners. In this phase, there really is not an open comment period. Basically, the attitude is that if you haven't made any comments up to this point, you're out of luck now. However, there probably will be some type of briefing to the commissioners before all of this happens. Now, the caveat with all of this is that once we get to 2019, there's really no guarantee of when the commissioners will act on this. They may take a month, they may take 6 months, they may take a year. So it is entirely possible that we could see this guidance and these regulations enacted at the end of 2019, or it may stretch out to 2020. Realize that at this point, the NRC commissioners could vote and act on the guidance that was proposed back in 2000. As far as I know, that has not been taken off the books yet. But NRC staff has also indicated that if there were a significant number of additional plant closure announcements, that there may be some impact to this overall schedule. So far, the announcements of Pilgrim and Fitzpatrick closings, I believe they were already assuming that those were going to occur. So those closure announcements have not impacted this schedule right now. However, just last week, Nuclear Energy Institute had released a public statement that said that there could be as many as 20 single-unit nuclear power plants in the United States that could announce a shutdown within the next 2 to 3 years.
Hey, Tony?
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you, but
Yes, I'm almost done here.
not that I don't appreciate
Yeah.
what you're saying.
But, you know, we could have some impact on the schedule, so.
Tony, you have a question?
Yes.
I just had a quick question as to why an increase in the closures would have an impact. Is it because of NRC resources?
Yes, just so everyone can hear the question, it was from Jen Duggan, and the question was, well, would this have impact on the resources? And the short answer is yes. The NRC is realizing that the same people, the same staff who would be drafting the rules are also the experts who would be reviewing decommissioning related licensing and exemptions submittals. So if they're working on rules, they're not working on the exemption and license requests and vice versa.
And just another little bit of context, if I understood it right, Jen, you were at that regulatory information conference too, and a lot of the conversation seemed to be, well, the NRC budget is shrinking and they're going to have to do more with fewer employees. And that seemed to be the refrain from both the industry representatives and the agency itself. Is that what you heard too?
You left off one phase, though, the judicial review process of any final rule.
Okay. Well, that is not a phase that actually I found anywhere in the process, or at least.
I just mean, if it's a significant rule, almost always, there'll be judicial review, and folks will challenge it, and that can also add another 5 years to the schedule.
Okay.
Because just walking through your presentation, you can see how long, these rulemaking processes can take at the federal level. And that the judicial review can add even another 5 years to it.
Okay. And just to clarify, I mean, that's something that the NRC really considers outside of its own process. So in what I was investigating on this and finding out about would not that this would not factor into that phase of itself. Okay. Okay.
Just how long the federal rulemaking process can take. So I'm Jen Duggan. Is it not on? Okay.
Yeah, it's not on.
Okay.
You'll need this too.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll turn this off and just sit down.
Yep.
That way it's a little easier. So I'm Jen Duggan, and I'm the General Counsel for the Agency of Natural Resources. And I'm actually wearing two hats tonight. I'm here to talk on behalf of the agency and our participation in the rulemaking process, but I'm also pinch hitting for Kyle Landis Marinello, who is the Assistant AG that has done just a heroic effort in herding all of the cats, both the state of Vermont cats and also our other states, and putting together a really comprehensive set of comments on this really important rulemaking. He has actually he's in Michigan of all places, defending Vermont's GMO labeling law. So he's sorry he can't be here tonight, but he's off, defending Vermont. So, just to, as Tony mentioned in his presentation, these comments are, they're over 100 pages long. We collaborated with, several agencies within the state. And then Kyle also spent time with our partners in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York. And they also joined these comments as well. So this truly was a collaborative effort. So I think what we're going to do for the rest of the presentation is provide a very high-level overview of the state comments, And then we're going to pick a couple of the key comments and dive into those in a little more detail. So starting off with sort of the high-level overview, these are really, these are the section headings from our comments. The first one is that, we felt that there needs to be more and meaningful host community and state participation in the decommissioning process. NRC should recognize state authority over non-radiological activities. Transfer of spent nuclear fuel to dry storage should happen as soon as possible. Emergency protocols should remain in place until spent fuel is in dry storage. And really, health and environmental monitoring should be ongoing until till the license is terminated. We also commented that the safe store option should be eliminated. All decommissioning activities really should be complete within 10 years of closure of the last reactor. Another comment was that it's really critical that licensees do a complete radiological and non-radiological site investigation and characterization at the time of closure to identify what the environmental risks are and to help better identify the monitoring that's needed to protect the public health and the environment. And merchant generators should be responsible for all decommissioning, site restoration, and spent fuel management costs. Generally, the NRC rules should limit exemptions to those truly exceptional situations. Those exemptions should be based on objective criteria, and there should be public participation with respect to the decisions about exemptions. The new rules should apply to plants that are already in the decommissioning process, so we advocated in our comments that the NRC should not grandfather any plants when these new rules are published. And then as Tony went through, there was a whole host of additional very specific questions that the NRC asked that the state provided comments on. So before we move forward with additional detail on the state's specific comments, I just wanted to pause and reflect on some of the differences that that I saw when reviewing our comments versus NEI comments and industry comments generally, because I think it's helpful to kind of understand the different perspectives and interests with respect to this rulemaking. From the state's perspective, generally this rulemaking is an opportunity to review the regulatory scheme for decommissioning holistically and advocate for changes that require more and meaningful participation for host communities and states, limit broad exemptions from compliance with NRC regs, and really require more active oversight and public process with respect to NRC decisions. Based on the review of the Nuclear Energy Institute comments, they have a much, not surprisingly, there's a much different perspective and a different set of interests. Generally, the comments are really focused on advocating for a narrow rulemaking to address very specific transactional inefficiencies. There's, from their perspective in the comments that NEI filed, there's no indication that the other pieces of the decommissioning regulatory scheme are an issue. And so there's no need to really delve into any of the aspects except for these transactional ones. The other perspective is that the existing regulations don't account for the reduction in risk that occurs when a plant stops operating. So from NEI's perspective, the regs need to account for this. Without this, industry really has got a choice between continuing to adhere to regulations for operating plants or seek these exemptions or changes to their licensing. And, I think driving, from that perspective, the changes that I saw at a very high level that NEI is advocating for is that there really is an affirmance of the status quo in many areas. Safe store and other current decommissioning options are sufficient. They would like to see regulations that account for the reduction in risk when the plant stops operating, and also regulations that reduce the number of exemptions and licensing actions that licensees are forced to seek during the decommissioning process. So I think it's helpful to, it's like I said, it's not surprising. Industry and the state will have different interests, but I think it's helpful to kind of understand the different perspectives with respect to this really important rulemaking as, more and more plants will close and have to go through this very complex decommissioning process. So I will touch on a few of our comments in a little more detail, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bill and Erica, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the ANR comments. So I think one of the number one of our comments, it was the first thing that we wrote about in our comments, was that really there needs to be more and meaningful participation by host communities and states. The current regulations really don't provide a meaningful role for host communities, and this is untenable given the fact that host communities and states really experience the bulk of the impacts from these plants. A few examples are the decommissioning pathway and the timeframes. There are several options that that licensees can consider. One of which is prompt decommissioning, and the other is delaying decommissioning for 60 years. Although the NRC is agnostic on which one of those pathways is appropriate, those two pathways have significant impacts for host communities. But there's really no ability at this point for host communities to advocate for one decommissioning pathway over the other. I think another really telling example is how the NRC reviews the PSDARs. Licensees have to submit these reports. They are the blueprint for decommissioning. They're important documents that set out what the licensee will do in terms of decommissioning. And currently, the NRC doesn't approve or deny these reports. They assert that they take no regulatory action based on this important document. There's no technical or substantive review. Their role is really limited to making sure that the boxes are checked, that the information that's required is there. That type of limited review really fails to meet the NRC's legal duty to protect public health and the environment. And it also shuts out the public from having any meaningful participation, opportunity for hearing, and the ability to seek judicial review of a report that they feel is insufficient. Overall, we also advocated for more public process around this rulemaking. We feel that it's important for the NRC to hold meetings and hearings in impacted communities so that NRC can hear from folks that are directly impacted by plants that are closing. Another important comment that the state made was that the transfer of spent fuel to dry storage should really happen as soon as possible. I think that it's clear that the NRC has recognized that dry cask storage is much safer. NRC has stated that storage in a spent fuel is really the biggest safety issue after a plant stops operating. So the state of Vermont advocated that, at best, ideally, these transfer would happen before the plant even stops operating. And at a minimum, the transfer would happen immediately after closure. We've already talked a little bit about grandfathering and limiting exemptions. And, our comments, advocated for no grandfathering to plants. We feel it's especially appropriate in this particular case because decommissioning can take 60 years. And all host communities really deserve the protection of new regulations. And then, the other piece is that the current exemption process should be modified. At this time, there really isn't a clear way for the public to comment on or have a hearing about whether or not certain exemptions are granted. And the lack of transparency in that process really erodes public confidence. So the state, advocated that the NRC should really limit those exemptions to unforeseen exceptional circumstances that are based on objective criteria, and that there should be public participation and hearing rights, during those processes. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica, and then I will be back to talk about the environmental issues later.
Okay, so we're going to tag team a little bit here. We're going to also try to make up for some time. We've given you a lot of information in the handouts that Erica actually put together for us tonight. So we're not going to touch on everything that is in the handout. The first thing is the real critical point is summarized here. That emergency protocols, including the emergency response data system, the 10-mile emergency planning zone, should remain in place for as long as spent nuclear fuel remains in a spent fuel pool, and ongoing health and environmental monitoring should continue until the license is terminated. The basis for this is about the NRC's determination that a zirconium fire in spent fuel is unlikely, but it does not consider adequately, in our opinion, accelerants that could be incorporated into the incident, hostile actions, or sabotage. And that this is particularly relevant because the current NRC guidance was compiled before 9/11, and of course we all know that the United States is now a target for these kinds of attacks. And that, in particular, spent fuel pools that lack concrete reinforced steel containment structures, as is the case with boiling water reactors with the spent fuel pool on the top floor of a building that has a steel shell of light gauge as opposed to concrete reinforced steel, are especially vulnerable to hostile actions. And we are also basing our opinion on the fact that even small amounts of radioactive contamination, especially of food, agricultural land, and water, will require significant off-site radiological surveillance, environmental remediation, that the radiation doses of the EPA Protective Action Guidelines are used inappropriately as a basis for licensee support of off-site response organizations. And the doses that you would get up to those EPA guidelines are created by large amounts of radioactive contamination. Specialized skills and knowledge, such as those currently employed by the states, are needed to assess this contamination, and licensee financial support of these skills and knowledge is required. Finally, that in this area, using guidance for independent spent fuel storage installations is inadequate for facilities with spent fuel in spent fuel pools. relying on a 10-hour period for mitigation of a spent fuel incident by on-site resources alone ignores the possibility that off-site relief may not be available until long after 10 hours, which we saw with Tropical Storm Irene and the destruction that occurred there. This is especially the case when spent fuel accidents occur not only in conjunction with a natural disaster, but also a hostile attack. And the large amount of heavy industrial activity that occurs during the final stages of decommissioning, what's called decontamination dismantlement, requires more than simple local law enforcement, the fire service, and emergency medical service, what they can provide. So I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thank you, Bill. So just to build on the emergency management and homeland security input to the state of Vermont comments, the emergency preparedness requirements as established in Title 10, Part 50, 47, and Appendix E to Title 10, Part 50 are the foundation for radiological emergency response programs across the country. That's what all of those programs use to basically define their emergency preparedness requirements both on and off-site. The elements listed there on the slide are outlined in these regulations and provide the basis for further guidance that's developed from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. While we recognize that hazard circumstances change during decommissioning, our comments to the NRC stress that the baseline requirements as outlined for operating reactors should remain in place, and only the implementation should change as the circumstances change. The other piece to this is based on the practice of granting exemptions to regulations like these. Currently, licensees are granted wholesale exemptions for these requirements, while the guidance from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on decommissioning, as referenced earlier, is wildly out of date by their own admission. These regulations that licensees currently adhere to don't reflect the current threat and hazard environment that we live in today. Further, the set of regulations that licensees adhere to are those that are meant for independent spent fuel storage installations and are not wholly reflective of the inherent differences in hazards as presented by spent fuel pools. The permanently defueled emergency plans as required for ISFACs do not outline a response protocol both off and on site that are commensurate with the risk involved. And as Bill mentioned before, the use of the EPA Protective Action Guidelines as a benchmark to assess danger to the public is flawed. The government still has an obligation to be able to validate measurements off-site for the public, to ensure the public that they are safe, as well as the environmental and economic impact of the surrounding areas. And finally, we really stress the importance of continuing to involve FEMA as which is an agency external to the NRC, in the role of validating off-site response capabilities throughout decommissioning. It's something that they do for operating reactors now, but they should still continue to be identified to do that throughout decommissioning as circumstances site to site change. One example of this type of evaluation would be for Medical Services 1 hospitals. Brattleboro Memorial Hospital is identified as one of those, and under the previous set of regulations, they're evaluated by FEMA on an annual basis for their capability to treat a contaminated patient. Under the current set of regulations for decommissioning licensees, the licensee can evaluate that themselves. And I'm not implying that licensees across the country aren't fully capable of doing that, but FEMA, as an independent external agency to the NRC validating that, goes a lot further in ensuring public trust in the system. Finally, the exercise, training, and planning requirements outlined in 5047 and Appendix E to that regulation are really the cornerstone to ensuring robust response capabilities. And the current requirements are really just simply not reflective of the type of preparedness needed. And those are some of the points that we made in the comments filed.
Great, thank you, Erica. Another assignment that I was given in this panel presentation was to look at the specific 80 questions. So what we've actually outlined here so far are preliminary comments, and then we had 80 questions that were part of the advance notice for proposed rulemaking altogether. But I'm not going to be able to touch on all of those, so I'll just highlight a few. The first is about the emergency response data system. You heard Tony talk about that. We believe that it's absolutely critical that radiological and meteorological data from the facility be provided to the state emergency response organizations so that they can understand what's going on site there to be able to provide guidance to responders and the public. That notifications of incidents have to be timely, much more than 60 minutes that's allowed in the current exemption process. And that notifications of major losses of off-site communications capabilities should be not notified to us within 8 hours, but much more prompt than that. There are a large list of security issues in here. And by the way, if you haven't read our comments on the advance notice for proposed rulemaking, they are on the NDCAP website, and very informative, very interesting to read. I think you would find the collaboration of 4 states together is useful to see how each of us has agreed on certain things. For example, security, we believe that in essence, security needs to remain high priority, much higher than is apparently indicated by the exemptions that are being granted. That one in particular is that there has to be analysis for airplane impact threats on spent fuel pools, and that there ought to be more assessment for radiological sabotage and beyond design basis threats, including combined incidents that might occur, a natural disaster as well as maybe some hostile actions or multiple natural disasters. And for security, fitness for duty programs, reliance on certified fuel handlers, all the states commented that the requirements must be rigorous, driven by safety and health concerns, not by potential economic savings for licensees. The changes in requirements should be created by a panel of experts that go beyond licensees and their employees, and that decommissioned reactors should be treated as high-interest targets for terrorists who might believe security is compromised due to lesser regulatory control. Relative to fitness for duty, we described again that we don't want relaxation there, especially during Safe Store. Almost everybody there's a security officer. Why would you want their drinking and drug and other aberrant behavior to be under less scrutiny than it is currently? Regulatory approach, we had comments here. I think one of the most important is that we believe that Safe Store should be eliminated as an option for any single reactor site, and that the completion of decommissioning and license termination should occur within 10 years following cessation of operations. This is proven by the fact that there are numerous facilities engaged in prompt decon now, and that other major countries, including France, who was just giving a presentation to the NRC at their Regulatory Information Conference in April, require prompt decon. And that Safe Store is only a financial mechanism of benefit to licensees, and there are risks to states for merchant plants like this at Vermont that might file for bankruptcy, and that radioactive waste expenses do not decrease with time, preparing for safe store and safe store wastes money that could be used for prompt decon. So we talk about the benefits of prompt decon. Host communities have employees there who are able to continue working, not have to hire new people decades later. You've got their institutional knowledge that you can use to do a better job, but not only them, but the federal, state, and local regulators. Their institutional knowledge can be used during that prompt decon. And that the responsible party, the licensee, the people that made money off the generation of electricity, they cover the cost of decommissioning and site restoration. We heard Jen talk about the PSDAR. There is no need to talk much further about that. And you can read that on your own there. We did think also the fact that the post-shutdown decommissioning activity report is cited as its own precedent, and that each time they write one, they say, well, it worked in Wisconsin, it's working, it should work here, is not a good basis for approaches in decommissioning. Backfitting, we heard some questions about that, and again, we do not believe that grandfathering, as Jen described it, should be allowed for these facilities. They should have to be kept to the same standards that are relevant for their conditions. Obviously, their conditions are different when they're not an operating plant. And that backfitting generally only benefits the licensee, does not benefit the local community that hosts these facilities and the state that may be stuck with costs because something happens there. And relative to that, decommissioning trust funds are a big source of protection for host communities. The NRC needs to make sure that the decommissioning trust funds are not used for spent fuel management. It undercuts the capacity to complete decommissioning. It doesn't reduce radiological contamination, which is what is required of these funds. It shouldn't be used for property taxes, insurance, lobbying, legal fees. The NRC should increase its oversight on how decommissioning trust funds are used instead of making rules that relax it, and that the financial oversight should be transparent when we don't think it adequately is. There's also questions about liability protection and on-site damage protection insurance. We believe, again, if the insurance is inadequate for an operating plant, it's inadequate for the costs that are likely even with a decommissioned plant should there be an accident or release, the economic and environmental impacts of even releases below the EPA protective action guidelines. We then have some final general comments about staffing. We believe a panel of experts from a diversity of backgrounds should be put together, not just from licensees, but a broad coalition to identify what is thought to be appropriate levels of staffing. We do not believe there's adequate staffing for environmental surveillance or emergency response, and that licensees should continue to support off-site environmental surveillance and emergency preparedness to supplement those licensee resources. We also noted that I have some notes about the exemption process. We've heard about that already, but primarily it is that the 90% of the comments from the public outside of those of the NEI and industry are dealing with the a concern about this being relaxation, that the public is not provided an equal footing, that the exemption process forecloses public cooperative agreements that could be made and needs to be changed because that's what the public says. And we'll turn it back over to Jen.
So the two issues that ANR focused a lot of their attention on was advocating for a recognition of state authority over non-radiological activities during the decommissioning process and generally. And then two, the critical need to have a thorough, complete radiological and non-radiological site investigation and characterization at the time the plant closes. With respect to the state authority over non-radiological activities, the law is well settled that NRC has authority over radiological aspects of the decommissioning process, and host states have authority over non-radiological activities and waste. And in fact, we have really the legal duty to make sure that public health and the environment is protected from non-radiological hazards. While a plant is going through a decommissioning process, there could be impacts to air and water quality as buildings are torn down, excavation occurs. The state has a duty to ensure that non-radiological solid and hazardous waste are both managed and disposed of safely, and then to ensure that cleanup of releases of non-radiological waste happens in a way that's protective of public health. Again, I think, the law is well settled. Licensees have argued that the Atomic Energy Act provides, it's broad preemption over state authority at nuclear plants. But again, the federal law is quite clear, and part of what we're advocating for in these comments is an express recognition of that in the NRC rulemaking or guidance document. The Atomic Energy Act basically states that the NRC has regulatory authority over nuclear safety. It expressly reserves state and local government authority to regulate nuclear activities for purposes other than protection against radiation hazards. So the test that's set forth in the courts is that there's no preemption where a state law is not motivated by radiological safety concerns, and there's no actual and irreconcilable conflict between the state law and NRC authority. Where states exercise authority authorized by federal statute, for example, Vermont implements our RCRA program, so that's a federal statute, but we implement that in the state of Vermont. Those are really two federal laws, and courts have a duty to give effect to both federal laws unless there's an actual and irreconcilable conflict. So this seems easy, but licensees have asserted broad preemption over state authority, over states' ability to regulate non-radiological hazards at nuclear plants. So this really is important. The other comment is that it needs to be an early radiological and non-radiological site investigation and characterization. Currently, the NRC allows that characterization to be delayed until 2 years before a license termination. That can be 60 years after operations cease at the plant. This delay really does create cost uncertainty, and it compromises the ability of states to protect public health and the environment. Without that information about what the potential releases and hazards are, it's challenging for the states to identify, monitor, and then remediate risk associated with that contamination. Vermont law actually requires full investigation and characterization of non-radiological contamination at the time a plant is closed. And it's difficult to ensure adequate costs are set aside for site restoration if you don't know where the contamination and the problems are. And again, this is really just compounded when you have a 60-year decommissioning period. The other thing I would just come back to is that, there's also cost uncertainty for the licensee and for the host states. We've seen at other plants that have gone through the closure and decommissioning process, contamination that has been a surprise to folks, that has costed a lot of money to clean up and remediate, that the licensee may not have been planning for. So without knowing where the contamination is and what needs to be done to clean up, and you discover contamination very late in the process, that could be at a time when funds are either gone or almost gone. So that's it. I think we're happy to take questions if folks have questions.
I want to thank Jen and Erica for coming all the way down here, and also for Bill and Tony for giving their part of the presentation. It was very useful, and I don't know if anyone on the panel has any questions. David?
A number of comments and some questions, and I will not apologize in advance if I offend somebody. It's bound to happen. I hear the comments protecting the public health and safety, and I'd ask everybody in the room to review this presentation again and the comments within it, within some slightly different contexts. There's two that are sitting in my mind. We're talking about regulating items that are found late, regulating items that are below regulatory limits, and so on. Two things come to mind. First, there's a number of studies. You can find them if you just simply do a Google search on tritium contamination that's emanating from landfills, open and closed landfills. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, their health departments sampled all of their landfill effluents and found that more than half of their landfills, this is across the 3 states, have tritium in the landfills and greater than the EPA safe drinking water limits. It's usually caused by tritium exit signs, which have about 20 curies per sign. They get dumped into the landfills improperly. Those 3 states decided that there's nothing to do because there's no need to do it because there's no health risk. And I'm wondering who regulates the tritium releases from our state's landfills. I don't think we have an answer because we don't, as far as I know, we don't sample those. But even more important is if you Google up between Eden and Lowell, with the Google Earth application, you can easily see the closed asbestos mine and the millions of tons of open tailings from the asbestos mine. You can see the white on the map. You can see where it's flowing into the wetlands. It's open in the air. There's one fence that's usually taken down because people like four-wheeling up there. This is open asbestos, a known carcinogen that's just flowing in the breeze. Our beloved Governor Shumlin, when asked about this a number of years ago, said, it's not causing anybody harm, let's just let it lie. It baffles my mind when I think of those 2 examples, and I'm hearing some of the comments here. Had to get that off my chest, and thank you for letting me bloviate. Specifically on slide 28, decommissioned reactors should be treated as high-interest targets for terrorists who might believe security is compromised due to lesser regulatory control. I just have trouble believing that Johnny Terrorist is thinking, I'm going to go after Vermont Yankee because as he's been reviewing the NRC rules and is looking at the applicability of the terrorist targets. And again, common sense, if I was Johnny Terrorist, I'd be more interested in getting a honey truck and dumping it into a landfill or a public water supply in Brattleboro, or going up to the State House while the State House is in session with some sort of a bomb. And if you've been to the State House, you know there's absolutely no security. You can basically walk right in. I would think that a terrorist, if he's looking at causing terror in Vermont, he's not going to go to the hardened site of Vermont Yankee. He's going to go somewhere else like that. And again, if you read this and these comments in that context, at least for me, it makes my head scratch a little bit. The comment was made, slide 30, that other major countries require prompt decon. And Dr. Irwin, you mentioned France. So 2 questions. Does France require this currently, or is that a regulation they're proposing? And are there other countries other than France as major countries who require prompt decon, and who are they?
Yeah, France does require it now.
Okay.
And I could get a list of other, I just used France because it happened to be in a presentation before the NRC the week that this was being written.
Also at the top of that slide, safe stores should be eliminated for single reactor sites, and the completion of decommissioning and license termination should occur within 10 years following cessation of operations. And we also talked about not backfitting, whatever the word was, grandfathering. the regulations. Is the state advocating that if these suggestions were implemented into the NRC rules, that would then require the Vermont Yankee site, which is a single site, to immediately start the decommissioning within 10 years of cessation, or are we talking about Vermont Yankee site being grandfathered?
No, it would be that it would be promptly decontaminated, not wait 10 years. But that would be the maximum until it was completed.
So we are advocating, if these are passed, that we would be within the 10-year window of decommissioning Vermont Yankee.
Absolutely.
Slide 31 talks about the prompt decon benefits. And the last point says the responsible party, the licensee, covers the cost of decommissioning and site restoration for prompt decon. I would challenge that statement, as I represent the workers at Vermont Yankee, and by extension the nuclear workers nationwide, that prompt decommissioning, there's significantly more radioactivity, and therefore there's much more dose, and it's not the responsible party that covers that cost. That's a cost that's borne by those workers from the increased dose. As a person who's been in the business for 2 decades plus, I'm not going to tell you my lifetime dose, but I can tell you that if you're talking about giving me a lot more, I'm certainly going to push back all I can. There's significant benefits to delaying decommissioning. That's the basis for a safe store.
Yeah, and I guess the argument is countered in the ANPR comments that other utilities, other facilities, other licensees find ways to do it now. In fact, we make the point that it used to be that outages lasted very long periods of time. Now they're accomplished very quickly, and it's because technology has improved greatly and doses can be managed more effectively, and that in fact the industry can do more with less dose than it ever could, and that we should not only continue to count on that, but that it's very likely that if we were to rely on that, even more dose savings would be found because people are finding ways to do things smarter rather than just sit with a plant on the side of the river.
I think it's a multifaceted conversation. I think there's a lot of different aspects to this. Using the best available technologies, waiting allows for decay and reduces the dose.
And
let's also forget,
we also provided some facts
part to
that
this as well, and
radioactivity does not
cost,
actually decay that rapidly.
The cost of decommissioning includes the cost of disposal. One of the components of the cost of disposal is the Curie content. Waiting reduces those costs. Doing it sooner increases those costs. There's a lot of aspects to that. And decay in place is a proven technology. That's all I have at this time. Thank you.
Does anybody else on the panel have any comments or questions? Oh, David.
I think I got this, but I want to verify through one question and then go just a little bit beyond it. Did I understand that Vermont is one of 4 states submitting these particular comments that you're talking to us this evening?
Yes, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York joined our comments, so we filed them together.
Okay, I wanted to hear it again. Good. Secondly, do you have any sense, I don't know when these comments were submitted, but do you have any sense of what the range of comments are? You gave us NEI, I understood that, but have other states filed, and what are they saying in other FEMA offices and other public service departments? Do we have any idea what they're saying? Not that.
So I could start with just real quick, the states, there are other states that have filed comments similar to what we filed here individually. And the collection of people in my role around the country filed their comments collectively as a group and were of a similar nature to those comments presented here. So we're not a minority opinion from the non-industry comments.
So just to build in, and the other states that didn't file concurrent comments with us, in other words, join our comments, but there were other states that did similar comments, including California, Washington, I believe Oregon, and
New Jersey.
New Jersey? Thank you.
Arkansas did as well.
Arkansas? What was wrong with them that week? Oh, no, I'm kidding. I'm sorry. Please don't. Yeah, that I know. That'll be on TV. It's okay. But everything's on TV now. It doesn't matter. And Jen may have mentioned it, but I wanted to say that I just wanted to thank the Attorney General's office and Kyle Landis Marinello particularly, who couldn't be here tonight, but he was instrumental in terms of like putting that coalition of states together. And we worked amazingly well with the Attorney Generals on this and the Agency of Natural Resources and Department of Public Service to put these comments together. What I also want to say is, like, I've had subsequent conversations with folks. You know, this will take years. This is not a quick rulemaking on their part. And the quicker it is, probably the worse it is. They need to take their time. I spoke with the Union of Concerned Scientists yesterday, and they're of similar mind, and we're going to see how we might be able to start building a coalition with them as well, because they did provide comments, although much less extensive than ours that we provided from the state, and they found some of our issues compelling that they want to pursue. So,
just one quick follow-up. To your knowledge, any state with a nuclear plant, closing or not, that filed counter comments in terms of the process and the issues that Vermont? And I realize I'm sort of reaching into a knowledge base that you have no reason to know necessarily, but if one did, it would probably stand out and you might know about it.
I'm not aware of any from mine.
I'm not aware of any, Tony.
I'm not aware of any either. However, it sounds like what I should do at some point is review the comments. All online now at regulations.gov.
Yeah, I know commissioners are not supposed to admit this, but I barely had time to read our comments, let alone anybody else's that were submitted. So,
one final comment. I want to thank David for pointing out the weakness in terms of the Vermont State House.
And the one last thing I would just add, you know, I think it would probably be helpful for the panel to hear from Entergy directly on their comments. I really touched very high level in terms of themes that I personally observed in terms of the comments, but didn't get into any specifics. So I think it probably would be helpful to get that additional perspective.
Yeah, and Entergy has been given the opportunity, if they'd like to talk about what their comments were as well. And I can tell you one thing that I don't think anybody said this. The NEI, in addition to submitting comments, they actually submitted draft language for the rulemaking. So, and it's all online somewhere. So.
May I comment on that? Because it was, being a regulator for a long time, I'm still surprised. The NRC's process is to accept from someone else a proposed regulation. And then if there's, put it up for public comment, if there's no discussion, to adopt it. That's what NEI tried to do the first time here, was to essentially codify all the exemptions that have gone into place that NRC has approved to date, and to just get that through, as Jen had described earlier, just kind of I'm not sure, I don't remember the word you used, but it's the mechanical, like structural things associated with this without delving into. Yeah, it was a transactional, thank you, and just trying to establish the status quo. I think we derailed that in a conversation that we had with NRC at some point. And that's why we're doing the broader rulemaking. They could still adopt the interim rules as guidance or something, but I don't think they will do that at this point.
And that just that to me underscores the whole purpose of keep pushing on the issue of engagement with host communities in this process. Because I can tell you, I've worked with other federal agencies, and other stakeholders may draft proposed language, but it's a lot of different stakeholders who are at the table. And I mean, thanks to Senator Leahy's staff for organizing a call with me and a number of folk at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There just seemed to be this pushback about engaging with host communities. I have no idea what all the aggregate host communities might even be advocating for as far as policy is concerned, but just even having a chance to kind of gather them, go over the issues and just see where there's consensus, where there's difference, and advise the NRC in this process. There just seemed to be this reluctance, and that's why I was so glad to see Department of Energy say, yeah, host communities would be, if we had a group of host communities to talk to, that'd be great. But I finally asked the question on this conference call, how could host communities, if, NEI seems to have this special relationship with the NRC, if host communities could organize themselves, could we have that same kind of access? And there was a pause, and they said yes. And that was pretty much the end of the call. So that's not just going to happen. This NDCAP's not going to be the organizer for that, but we're going to have to just keep pushing on it. And that's why I'm suggesting that maybe working with DOE, EPA, and other agencies that are working on kind of cross-cutting nuclear issues, the other partners in the federal community might be able to bring some positive peer pressure to bear on the NRC to say, let's open up the door and welcome folk in to have the conversation.
I can just say one thing. When I was down there at the NRC meeting, the March 15th meeting, Commissioner Barron of the NRC is really an advocate for public participation in the process. So, there is a voice within the commissioners of the NRC. And I'm not saying that our panel can do it alone, but there are other people out there, and I agree with Chris. But I think if we do keep speaking up, I had a nice conversation with him afterwards, and so. I just want to read one quick thing that I got from George Twigg, who's the state director for Peter Welch, and this goes back to resources on making this rulemaking go quicker. And this is sort of stuck in the quagmire of Congress, but Congressman Welch and Congressman Keating, who's from Massachusetts, they offered an amendment to the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill yesterday that would internally transfer $1 million within the NRC into their decommissioning account. And the intent is to provide the NRC with additional resources to advance the decommissioning rulemaking process and increase the level of public engagement, and on and on and on. The amendment passed with on a voice vote. However, the overall bill, it got stuck with the transgender bathroom issue. So the money went away. But what they're going to try to do is get it perhaps on the omnibus budget bill later this year. So at least there's somebody out there trying to get some additional resources to move the rulemaking process along. Pat or Diane, are you still there, and do you have any questions?
This is Pat. I'm still here. No questions, but fascinating discussion.
Does anyone else on the panel have anything about this topic? Great. Well, I want to thank Bill and Tony, and again, Jen and Erica for coming down. We really, really appreciate it very much. Does anyone in the public, right now I want to just take questions on the ANPR. Do you have one, Carol, on that?
I do, but I don't know that this works.
It does. It just, I think it's a good way to start talking.
You can.
Thank you. I'm Carol Levin from Guilford, and I just want to thank all the people that worked on this. I think they've done a tremendous job, and there are a lot of things that the community has been really, really concerned about. One of the things that I particularly am happy about is defining that this decommissioning can be done in 10 years. Maine Yankee did it in 9 years. There's no reason that we can't do it in 10 years. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who worked on this. And the other part was having the state and the community be a big part of this, because it's our life, it's our community, it's our environment that needs to be protected. And the sooner we get this plant decommissioned, certainly the better we will be. And waiting this 60 years when nobody here is going to be here anymore, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it was a ridiculous figure. So thank you very much for all of your hard work.
Thank you, Carol. Does anyone else in the public have any comments on the ANPR discussion? Leslie.
Leslie Sullivan-Sachs from Brattleboro, and I'll just echo the thanks that Carol made, and also just say that given the level of detail that Bill and Erica and Jen presented, I'm very hopeful that the EPZ, that the gift that was given this evening, will be one that is appropriate to the current status of the reactor, and really look forward to hearing more about that.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience? Great. Now we'll move on to our discussion about the public access to the meetings. Just a quick review. This came up because someone was on the phone. We decided at the last meeting to put a little group together to talk about it and perhaps come up with a solution. The little group was 4 people. 2 of us were actually able to be at the meeting. Chris Campney, he was sick, but he sent in the language that we have in front of us. And I think it was Jim Tonkovich and I who were physically present at the meeting. And so we decided we would just throw this out there to everyone. Hopefully what we'd like to do through this is just sort of clarify what we mean by public access, how we can do that. Obviously, we worked hard, or Tony and David worked really hard to make sure that the call-in system actually works, because I know that was a big concern for probably all of us. It's been a big concern, particularly the people that call in and can't hear anything. So hopefully we've sort of checked that box off. The thought is to add language to the charter so that going forward, we're not having this debate every single time we have a meeting. Does everybody have the draft language? And I don't know if anyone has any comments on it. There is a section in the charter that at the very end that deals with no, I can't find it. Actually, it's page 4 of the charter under meetings, which talks about, as long as their open meeting requirements are met, the panel may conduct business and vote at regular meetings electronically. That seems as though it would be the perfect place in the meeting section if this is something that we want to put in. So I don't know if anybody has any comments, or Steve.
Yes, I just had a couple of, technical questions. In terms of the number of people that can call in on this system, is this like unlimited, or is there a finite number? And then couple that question with if one of the panel members, such as myself, at the last minute is unable to attend but still wants to be involved in the meeting, is there any way to get in at the last minute, or that kind of thing? That would be of interest to me.
Yeah, and Tony, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think we had the discussion where we could have like 10,000 people or 1,000 people call in. So I don't think the capacity is an issue.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. Right now, we're using GoToMeeting. and this is a particular software package. It's rather simple to use. Its limitation is that the total number of connections, I believe, is 25.
Okay. But we discussed there was another one.
There is a companion software package to GoToMeeting called GoToWebinar, which has that's where the 1,000 connection comes in.
Yeah, so the
Now,
answer is we could get something that if we wanted more than 25 people.
Yeah, currently GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, the Public Service Department has 2 licenses for those software, and I've kind of been hogging one of the licenses right now. But I'm returning it now.
Can I go to the, I just want to speed up because we're running out of time. So the answer is if we went to something else, we could have 1,000 people.
Yes.
The other question is you can call in at the last minute. There's no requirement.
What I've been doing in practice is I've been sending out connection, a connection notice to the entire panel. We can continue to do that.
But the answer, I don't mean to.
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Tony, the answer is yes. You can call in. If
Yes.
Steve noticed 5 minutes in advance, he could call in.
Certainly.
And I'll just, and again, to speed things up, the point of the language that I drafted is this, when you live stream by like the webinar, that's to provide access. It's not going to be an exchange back and forth. There are options under that where you can type in questions and that kind of thing. But to me, the big question is just, do we provide access or do we not? And I think we figured out it's cheap, it's inexpensive, and technologically doable.
Steve, were you set?
I did have one additional question, which is, are we still going to be requiring a in-room quorum presence, or are we talking now about all of a sudden not even having a quorum here, but members calling in?
No, we want people to come here. This is one of these things that if you're a panel member and you can't get here, if you can get here, we want you to get here because obviously it works better for everybody. This is just so if somebody by chance cannot be here and cannot make it.
I understand that, but what I'm thinking about is, for instance, WRC meetings have actually been conducted, even though we didn't have a quorum for certain votes, by people calling in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that this panel is planning on doing?
There's already a provision in the charter that allows us to do that.
Right. I think we're conflating panel participation with public participation.
That's right. We're talking about people who...
I'm talking, because this is going to be available to the panel too, I assume.
Yes.
It is
We've already
currently.
got 2 people here from the panel that are here.
Yeah, Steve, it isn't and has been. This is about the general public.
Yeah. From day one, people have been able to, from our first panel meeting, people on the panel have been able to call in. The question is, and this came up because a reporter called in at the last meeting.
And I remember the reporter thing.
Yeah,
and
so this is dealing with how the public who for some reason can't be here and wants to be involved in the meeting.
Okay, good.
Does that make sense?
Thank you, very informative.
Kate, this is Pat. Tony indicated that he sends out the public access to the panel members. Perhaps the access to GoToMeeting should also be sent with the public notice of the meeting if the intention is to alert the public to this option.
Yep, Pat, if we pass this charter edition, that will easily can be done.
I would happily make a motion to adopt the recommendation of the committee and amend the charter accordingly.
Second.
Okay.
Question?
I was writing at the moment. Sure. Okay, anybody have any comments now that we have a motion?
Yes, now that we have a motion on the table, and thank you, and Pat mentioned one of the things I was concerned about, which is just making sure that when we do the public notice, we should automatically include this in that so that people can get there. I think this is perfect, particularly with how it dovetails with the meeting thing that you read a minute ago, Madam Chair, which was about, holding meetings. They could be, as Stephen was interested in, they could be in person, they could be by phone, they could be by email, but they need to be public meetings if we're discussing any type of thing that needs to be voted on or is discussed among the committee, and public need access to that. And I think this is perfect, and I thank you all very much for doing it.
Jim?
And this is Pat again. I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand, so I'm sorry for interrupting. But I really do want to thank Tony and David for solving this problem, because this system is infinitely better than anything we've had before, which I think facilitates the involvement and engagement so much better. So had we not had this system in place, I might feel differently.
This is Diane, and I agree.
What you guys don't see is that we have a video on the wall that actually changes your voice into color patterns. So we've been enjoying the thing all along.
But as long as the video isn't actually of me sitting here at my desk, I'm happy with that, Chris. Thank you.
No, because in that case, we would have been able to see you raising your hand.
Colors we are?
We'll let Jim, and then we'll...
I just want to, I think it's a great idea, and I support the motion. If it's going to go out, just a couple of things to think about. If it's going to go out in the public notice, you could easily hit that 25 limit. And I would suggest that it makes sense for panel members to be able to call in and participate over the phone. Let the general public participate over the webinar, where they can watch and listen to the whole thing, satisfying the public information and transparency without clogging the phones. And because if you say any public comment and there are 24 people on the phones, it's going to be chaos. And I don't think we need to go that far. I think the webinar for the public to watch and listen, and the phone for panel members would work.
At this point, no one's watching, but Jack?
Just one comment. Those that remember why this came up, it was a media person that had to call in, and Entergy took offense to that, if you would. And the media are certainly members of the public. And I just want to voice that my opinion is that if the media is going to represent what goes on in this meeting, that they ought to do everything that they can to attend the meeting so that they see all the interaction of the panel and be able to write a full, balanced report of what goes on here.
Yeah, and I think we asked that of the panel too, and I think we've only had we looked at it, and we only had maybe like two. It's okay, Tony. We've had like 2 reporters ever call in, so I think that's well taken for everybody. Steve?
Yeah, just one quick follow-up question. How do you plan to, as the chair and moderator, I mean, how do you plan to take people? I mean, you can't see someone raising their hand. What are you going to be doing in that instance?
I actually hadn't thought about that, but that's something we can work through. I think we can work through it.
That feature is actually in GoToWebinar.
We have an ability to type in a question on our screens here. So, and as long as Tony's monitoring, then questions from the phone numbers or folks on the phone can be recognized.
Oh, great.
GoToWebinar has a button right on the control panel that says raise your hand. If that's coming in, then yes. Tony sees it, sends a message to the chair, and the person can be recognized. I spent 2 hours on that this morning. I'm raising my hand all the time.
Jim?
When we got the copy that Chris sent, what sold me on, because I know there was concern about, can you hear everything? Can you really get a sense of the meeting? Can you get an accurate portrayal of what's going on? One word in here sold me on all of the other copy, and that was reasonable. And I think the public understands that, and I think the press understands that. It's a very important word. Maybe the most important word in here is reasonable. And I think that really did it.
So I have 2 general thoughts here. First is just a suggestion that if what we're talking about is increasing public access and public awareness at a public meeting, that this process be considered as well by the Public Service Board, the committees up at the State House, the Brattleboro Select Board, and so on. It's good for the goose, good for the gander, and it should be continued.
Do it all the time, sir.
Thank you. My overriding concern here is that we have a state nuclear engineer who's going to become a go-to-meeting technician. I've said this before, and we need to come up with some way that Tony becomes the state nuclear engineer again and doesn't become the AV guy.
Actually, the person I'm learning this from is a nuclear engineer for the Department of Energy. She is much better at this than go-to-meetings. I can ask.
We're gonna, go ahead, Kate, please, unless you want to.
Well, we've got somebody who is going to take the minutes. And we can probably, through this agency, if we get this far, if we get so high-tech that we have thousands of people that want to come in, we can probably get a second person, I'm assuming, Chris, if you let us, to actually help us connect with
Yeah,
the...
I mean, my ideal scenario would be one person that can do both, but hey, the department is supporting a contract for Kate to actually help do agendas, minutes, meeting management and stuff, so I can get Tony back to being a little bit of a nuclear engineer. Yeah, so but that support will be provided, and we'll make sure the person's qualified to do it.
This Pat again, and I don't know if this helps in terms of taking minutes, but I note on the screen here is this session is being recorded. So I wonder if minutes could even be taken by someone who is in an office the next day as opposed to worrying about it tonight.
Part of the problem I found with that, Pat, is you have to actually see the people so you know who's talking. I mean, that's sort of been it's a good idea, but then in theory, when you don't know who said what. Because I've actually tried it myself and it doesn't work. Steve.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. If we do go to this this method, which I think is a good idea, we do need to continually introduce ourselves as, for instance, in my case, Steve Skipnowski, because it's going to be very difficult. I mean, I don't know that the people on the phone right now know what my voice sounds like, and certainly people just calling in randomly definitely wouldn't. So I think we need to, every time we do this, maybe say, Steve Skipnowski, and so forth. Yeah.
No, you're 100% right.
Yes, I'm Steve Skipnowski, and I'd like to, no, I'm just kidding.
So does anybody else have any comments? Or can we...
I'd love to see a vote.
Yeah. Derek, do you want to start on your end?
The vote?
Yeah.
Yes, aye.
And Chris Campney?
Aye. Yes.
Chris Campney, aye.
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 Or say who you are, because we need Pat and...
David Andrews, yes.
David Dean, aye.
Chris Recchia, aye.
Kate O'Connor, yes.
Martin Langeveld, yes. Bill Irwin, aye.
Jim Tonkovich, yes.
George Dash, aye.
Jim Matto, yes.
Mike McKinney, yes.
Jack Boyle, yes.
And Steve Skibniowski, yes.
Pat Moulton,
Yes.
Diane Becker.
Yes.
All right, so it's unanimous. And we'll
Yay.
we'll put an addition into the charter, and then we'll keep everybody apprised as it goes along. Does anyone from the public have a comment on anything? There's Carol. Okay. Thank you. The plan now, and we had an issues committee meeting, so the plan now is to have a meeting in June, which would be June 23rd. And we have Vernon Elementary School as the location. Hopefully it'll be a little cooler there. And then to take July and August off because it's summer and it's really impossible for people to get together. And then meet again in September. And the issues committee had some issues that we were thinking about, which is beginning the talk of site restoration. We also have there's some security changes at the plant that we were going to get an update on. We were going to have the congressional delegation staff come to not only tell us what's going on, but have us tell them what we think. So those are just a few of the things that we'll have on the agenda. And if the CPG comes through, we can have a conversation about that. And I've not only did the issues committee talk about this, but I've actually talked to the state and Entergy about this. So we seem to be all on the same page on what we want to do at the June meeting. We're just like a couple minutes over. Does anybody else on the panel? One thing what we'll do is, and I mentioned this in the beginning, that we might draft up something about the consent-based citing, public input thing, and just send it around to see what people think about it. So if you get that, don't be surprised.
Kate, if I can just add something on that. The Department of Energy did issue a short questionnaire on that. It's 5 very general questions. I don't know if you've seen those, but I can forward those to you.
Yeah, forward them and we'll send it around. David Andrews made a motion to adjourn, and David Dean, all the Davids. All in favor of adjourning? Great, okay. We'll see everybody June 23rd, and it's at Vernon Elementary School.